So this is our first budget workshop of this 22 fiscal year budget. Want to welcome everybody. Want to thank everybody as we, again, continue to pivot as an organization. Closer. Thanks. So we're going to really, this is the board's session, work session. So we made a couple changes to this presentation, really reflective of the questions that the board asked at the last meeting. And then my suggestion would be we would go through the departments similar that we did last meeting, but to spend more time on individual departments. So with that, go to the next slide. Okay, so just a recap of 21, our budget remained at 28 cents. Our fund balance exceeded 34%. We didn't use any fund balance to balance the budget last year. And then, reduced some revenue projections and expenditures related to COVID. And then we received about $184,000 within the town for COVID-related CARES dollars. And we are going to seek some additional expenditures. Really, these are kind of day-to-day COVID things. In the fiscal year 22, next slide, please. We do expect, and we've already seen, recovery in revenues, particularly sales tax, big surprise in many ways. And then we are proposing to add 7 positions, and we are proposing to, or the manager's proposal is to raise taxes 1.5 cents. In the last presentation, there was kind of a disclaimer, for lack of a better word, talking about the ARP funding and how we were optimistic or cautiously optimistic. We have since taken that off based on what we continue to learn about ARP funding. One, we think it's going to be very, very restrictive, and final rules aren't due to be publicized until July 16th. So it's put us into a really much different position on the ARP money, and Assistant Manager Becky Hawk will talk about that during this presentation. All right, there's a kind of a history of our tax rates for the last 10 years, 11 years for town of Matthews. Next slide. So one of the questions that came up was like the difference between the budget we're talking about this year, the 22 budget, which is there at the top. And then typically what we do show you all is a 21 amended budget. And that thing's larger than what we're talking about to this year. And we're talking about an increase this year. So we did want to show you the original budget that the board approved. And it was a very unusual year. And we'll even go over the number of increases that we had to the changes that we had to the amended budget. Many of them are significant. All right. Again, property taxes, virtually 16%, sales tax, 60% property taxes, sales tax 16, shared revenue 12, and then miscellaneous 13. Here's kind of just some, just things out of our control. One of them is the state retirement contributions went up $173,000, keep the system solvent, and then solid waste fees due to CPI went up almost $64,000. Just kind of. Then we do show a 3% merit pool increase, 7 new positions, a contracted crime scene technician, and then reclassification of telecommunicators positions. All right, so the next 3 or 4 slides relate to what came out of the last meeting on May 10th. So the one question was, what's the difference between this amended 21 budget and then the original 21 budget? And it's a $2.2 million difference. And here's how it came about. $484,000 is COVID CARES Act funding. $300,000 of that we distributed out to businesses. And I'd like to thank Becky Hawk for her hard work. Other folks helped her. I think we are only town that did this too. So kind of kudos for us and looking out for our small businesses. And then of course, town expenses of $184,000. Then the second thing we did, as y'all will recall, is the paving of Matthews Station Street, which was close to $600,000. We made some relatively small improvements to the sound system at Fullwood Theater. And then we had about $1.1 million in fund balance appropriations for, we appropriated unspent power bill funds. That was a big dollar. We purchased property that's about $900,000 off the top of my head. And then we did some work on the cupola, which was more expensive than I think we probably expected. So there's an example of these things that come up during the year, very unusual year based on the size of the changes that were made to the budget. So the other question that came up was, what's the difference between the police department from 20 to 21 and then 21 to 22? So from fiscal year 20 to 21 is about $181,000 difference. We reclassified a captain to a major's position. We hired one new position and then reclassed 2 lieutenants, and we did it at mid-year. That was $60,000. And we did some new software for in-car cameras. That's $24,000. And then we had half a year raises, benefits, and department operations was in the neighborhood of around $90,000. Then the next slide shows, okay, so the big mover is this year from the current year, which is 21, and then July 1st, we'd start fiscal year 22. And that's $900,000. And where did that money come from? One of the things we wanted to remind everybody of is we did get a governor's highway safety grant program. I know it was Governor's Highway Safety Program, $130,000 grant. So, when we do the math on these things, just remember on the revenue side, there's an extra $130,000. So that's going to increase the expenditure side. So there's 130 there. The other half of that new position that we showed in the last slide, then we're showing 4 patrol officers, 4 patrol cars, that crime scene investigator contract, I should have put that in there, and then reclassified the dispatchers, and then operations, salaries, benefits, and operations, about $240,000. It's a big.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, anytime. I should have said that. Any question at any time, yeah.
Okay, so is these 4 new officers in the last budget, or this is proposed budget?
This is the proposed budget. That is a $0.015 tax increase. So in the $0.015 budget, or 29.5 cent budget, includes 4 patrol officers and 4 patrol cars. Okay, next slide. So then the other question is, what are the revenues and expenditures from the last 2 years? And I use audited figures. So what we have is an audit for fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20, and then fiscal year 21 will end here June 30th. And then you don't get the audit until, November or December, and typically it gets before the board early in January. And so the revenues for the fiscal 19 budget were $24.4 million. Expenditures were about 23.9. And then fiscal year 20, the revenues were $26 million essentially, and expenditures were $26,250,000. So also what came out of the last work session was what can we learn about ARP, and Becky's gone through a couple training sessions. One training session, one high level paperwork session. I think Renee was in on that. She said it was pretty unexciting. Didn't learn much. So Becky's going to talk to us a little bit about the ARP based on what we've found out, a status report. That's a good way to say it.
Sure. Thanks, Hazen. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I will just start off by saying even the second session training is probably a generous word, but we did want to spend a couple of minutes just sort of going over with the board what we believe we know as of today. This is all kind of continuing to be subject to change, and we'll go over those details a little bit. So Maureen, can you advance, please? So just to sort of recap where we are with the American Rescue Plan, as everyone knows, there was a huge federal bill passed in March that included funding for local governments And we are considered a non-entitlement unit. That's an NEU. That really just means that we are a locality with less than 50,000 people in it. And so how the federal government is divvying out the money is that they will be sending our money to the state of North Carolina first, who will then divvy it out to all of the NEUs, including the town of Matthews. So we are still expecting the money to come in 2 tranches, word of the year, I guess, never heard that word before, but essentially 2 funding cycles. The first half of the funding we expect will be coming in the coming weeks. And we're all lined up. We've got all of our correct EIN numbers and DUNS numbers, and everything that we need for that is all in place. So we're just waiting for additional steps to take to claim that first round of funding. And then we expect the second round of funding to come about 12 months after we receive the first. The numbers have not quite been finalized, but they have published what seems to be the final numbers for all localities. Based on those publications, we are slated to get about $9.3 million. And the eligibility period for using the funds, we will have through December 2024, definitely to use them. Some of the latest language we saw, we might be able to just have the funds allocated, and we may actually have through about 2026 to spend all of the funding and then complete all of our paperwork. So still a little bit more to come on the exact timing of the ending of the program, but at least December 2024 is a safe date. So like Hazen said, we did receive preliminary guidance that was published by the Treasury Department on May 10th. It is 150 pages long. It is very, very dense. That is really, though, what we're calling initial interpretations. And we say that because it is interim guidance. So it is not their final rule. There are a lot of explanations within the 150 pages, but there are also a lot of questions. It's questions from the people working at the Treasury posing the questions to localities just like us, saying, what are we forgetting here? How might this impact you? And they have opened up public comments through July 16th of 2021. So we don't know how much longer after July 16th it will be before the final rule is published, but we know it will not be before then because they're still in their public comment period right now. So we know that it will be at least through July 16th before we could officially say these are the actual final rule guidelines. They are also expecting to release some additional guidance for the non-entitlement units like us. We heard it could be later on this week, but we don't know that for sure. It was the first I'd heard that there might be something additional coming for the non-entitlement units like Matthews. I heard that for the first time earlier this week, but that will also likely be in that interim guidance format. And some of it may be focused more on reporting requirements because our rules are going to be a little bit different than a locality that receives their funding directly from the federal government. So we just don't know the level of specificity that's going to be in that additional information and when exactly we're going to receive it.
Becky?
Yeah.
How does that affect the deadlines? Our budget is normally passed before we're going to get these guidelines.
Yep.
So how do we maneuver a budget with such a variable?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the board, once the budget, if the board adopts the budget in June of this year, the tax rate is set. In other words, we couldn't get good information in August, let's say money information, and go back and reduce the tax rate in September. So the board is set with a tax rate that the board adopts for the whole year. When you adopt a tax rate in June, it stays constant the entire fiscal year.
And the numbers that you quoted were 50% this year, 4.6 million 6.5, whatever the real math is, and then another half, 50% of that in a year.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep. So the guidance based on what we think we're seeing in the documentation right now, and I can't stress that enough. A lot of this is very preliminary, but we're really just scrambling and doing everything we can to sit in on any webinar that's offered, anything that we see that helps us. But what we do believe we're seeing in the guidance is this is not going to be a blank check. This is not going to be, spend your $9+ million however you want. And they are really grouping the funding into 4 types of uses. And I'll go through each of them quickly, but they're up there on the screen. The 4 types are respond to public health emergencies and negative economic impacts, revenue loss, premium pay, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So to dive a little bit deeper into each of those, next slide, please. So responding to the public health emergency, this is really centered around medical expenses, behavioral health care. If we provided public health services, this would be a primary funding opportunity for us. So what we're seeing in the guidance right now, a lot of those don't qualify. The one that we're still trying to get some additional guidance on would be potentially payroll and benefits for existing public safety staff, but there's some additional specificity in the guidance that it's staff that is directly responding to COVID-19. There was some different guidance in the CARES Act that just sort of automatically qualified a police officer or a firefighter and said 100% of their time, just to make it easy, 100% of their time we're going to qualify as being COVID response related. That is not written the same way in these guidelines. It appears much narrower. And so I would say it would be questionable at this point if any payroll and benefits of our existing staff would reasonably qualify under this provision because they're not directly involved the way that, say, somebody working for the health department might be. So it is going to be, we believe, a narrower scope than the CARES Act funding.
Becky, how about all the PPE we bought?
So the PPE, so you can't double dip. So we've got a couple of other funding sources that we're exhausting first for the PPE that we purchased. So the first one, the FEMA reimbursement is still in place. So we are still going through those reimbursement request processes. Those are in queue. They're to the federal government. We've received no dollars. I have no idea where we are in line. So we would need to go through the FEMA reimbursement process, have something denied by FEMA, and then if it was purchased within the right qualifying period, we could potentially use this program for those dollars, but we can't just automatically apply these dollars because if FEMA reimbursed us and then we use these dollars, it'd be considered double dipping. So we've got to go through the FEMA process first since we're already underway with that. Yep.
Could we go back and reimburse ourselves for the hazard pay we gave officers and stuff last year?
So great question. So we've already done that. And that was how we utilized the $184,000 in the CARES Act funding. That was how we fulfilled that justification for use of the funds that we received from the county. So all of the hazard pay that we have paid out, that was actually, was that FY20 when we actually did that, we have essentially been reimbursed, but we received those dollars in the current fiscal year. But that would also at this point be considered double dipping to go back and do that. Good question, though.
One more question. Rob, do you have any idea how many times you responded to COVID-related emergencies?
We could dig it out.
Good question.
We could dig out the time spent dealing with an individual incident, but it would be in the hundreds of incidents we have to call. short answer, yes. We could.
So the next one is negative economic impacts. The brunt of this guidance is really directing expenditures towards helping households and individuals, assisting small businesses, aid to impacted industries. It's essentially the program that we ran using the CARES Act funding some months back. So this would be an additional pot of money if the board was interested in reinvigorating or changing up that type of program and offering something like that back out to the community. So in terms of what's within the proposed FY22 budget, we don't have any program like that currently slated in the budget for next year. So again, drawing your attention to what is in dark red there, there is a provision that gives broad latitude to address impacts on our ability to deliver general government services. So I'll tell you, when I started reading it, I got really excited. I was like, this is it. This is what we were waiting for. And then I kept reading. And so this broad latitude is then kept within the scope of how much revenue you can document that you have lost over these fiscal years. So basically what that means is there's an entire formula that you go through, and I'll get to that slide in a minute. You go through this entire formula to be able to say, based on this formula, we lost $1 million in revenue. That is then the $1 million that you would have broad latitude to spend on providing government services. So you've got to go through the step of showing the revenue loss first, and then that determines how much money would be available that falls into this category. So it's not just broad latitude using the entire $9+ million. It also provided for the hiring of staff. So I got excited again, and then I also kept reading. And what they mean is if we had been a locality that had laid off staff, if we had used that to get to a balanced budget, we could rehire using these funds up to pre-pandemic levels. But we didn't do that. So all of the staffing that we're talking about, we wanted to add, but we didn't ever go forward with it in the budget because it wasn't something that we could fit. So it's not something that we can then just automatically use the federal funds to pay for staff under this provision. The broad latitude also explicitly disqualifies general infrastructure projects unless the cost of that infrastructure project fits within that revenue loss pool of money as well. So again, you can't say, we want to build a road, it's going to cost $5 million. That's broad latitude, let's do it. You would have to first demonstrate that you had $5 million in lost revenue, and then say, we want to spend that $5 million on the road project. So the linchpin in that is establishing your revenue loss first, and then that's what you really have more of the broad latitude to then spend how you want.
Becky, I'd just like to add, in broad terms, we budgeted conservatively for sales tax, but our sales taxes are exceeding our budgeted amounts. Property tax is we're getting about what we expected or what the county projected for us. So it's like there's no, in my opinion, no big needle movers. I think about tourism. Right, we've lost some tourism funds. Okay, but that's a very specific use. It can't. It's all whatever regulated by the state statute. Is there an argument for parks and recreation? Lack of revenue there. Again, this $9.7 million is a huge number in my mind. When I think about where we have opportunities, we're talking little. On the scope of things, not a lot of money.
Can I say something too? But if the federal guidelines are broader than the state guidelines, those federal guidelines preempt what the state dictates, right? So if it's the state saying things specific to tourism funds, does that mean that we have to stick with that? Or do we go with what the federal guidelines on these monies is?
That's a Charlie question. That's
Yeah, I think we'd have to get legal advice on that. Renee?
I just say that because the webinar I listened to with the League of Cities said that several times, that this funding, like the guidelines preempt what the individual states say. So it's worth asking Charlie.
Yeah, I think what Mayor Pro Tem Garner is referring to was, I think there was a concern in the federal guidance that states would put a lot of strings on the money to basically say, okay, non-entitlement unit, we're not going to give you your money unless you promise to use it for X, or you can't use it for Y. And so that was where they seemed to be going with saying, you have to follow the federal guidance. You can't put additional strings on it, given that the tourism restrictions have nothing to do with the pandemic. Those existed prior to this. I think there's a nuance there that we would definitely want to exhaust before we just said, okay, we lost $300,000 in tourism revenue, but now those are free dollars to use for a non-tourism related purpose. That would be a path that I think we would need a lot of guidance on before we went down it. Ken?
Since the money has to come through the state, so say by 2024, 2026, we're just not able to figure out how to spend this $9.3 million. Does this go back to the state and they get to pocket it, or does this have to go back to the federal government? Who pockets it after if we can't spend it?
I don't know. My strong goal is to not have to find out.
That's right.
John?
Becky, dive into help households and individuals. What does that mean?
You could create a program that said we want to give a $100 bill to every citizen in the town of Matthews because we want to help them because maybe they've been impacted by COVID.
$265 per person for 35,000 people.
Yep. And then it's gone. Yep.
Well, then if it's like that, can't we say, well, we're helping them economically by not raising our taxes a penny and a half? Yeah, I mean, there's...
It starts to feel a little thin. I understand what you're saying, but again, we're dealing with interim guidance. I keep on saying I am all for creative interpretation, so long as it is vetted and some sound legal mind feels like they can defend us in court and not have to have us pay it back. Then by all means. But short of that, maybe not.
Hearing all these restrictions is really frustrating. I'm not frustrated at you.
Sure,
I'm frustrated
I know
at the
it's not
federal
personal.
government and the state because, this almost sounds like a farce if our hands are tied so tightly. I mean, it's a joke to say. And the other thing I want to say is I don't want to give 1 cent of this back that we don't have to. And I would hate for us to give, $5 million back and have, our sister cities around us use all their money and say, well, you guys screwed up. You should have used it. So I'm all for being creative. We need to find a way to spend every cent of this if we can. I don't want to send it back.
Sure. I'll get into it here in a minute, but, we're in an interesting position just based on the types of services that we do and don't provide. So if we were engaged in public health, if we were engaged in education, if we were engaged in, water and sewer, you could spend the money in a second and be looking for more. So some of the avenues are just going to be kind of automatically closed off to us. That being said, I think it's the interest of staff to, exhaust every avenue for town operations, town capital expenses, exhaust that completely. And then if there is funding left over for some of these additional, a small business program or something like that, then maybe that's what we look at that point to make sure that we are at least putting the funds out within this community. But there's a lot of roads that we want to make sure that we're traveling related to town expenses, I think, before we would want to look at some of those others, because there are other programs in the federal funding to help small businesses. So it's not like they're, like, if they don't get anything from us, there's no other program available. There's a lot of dollars out there for some of the businesses who might still be impacted through this pandemic.
And can you touch on the affordable housing bullet point?
Yeah,
Because
so
that's something we discussed a lot.
that was an interesting one that also, at face value piqued my interest. And then the qualifier in there is that it has to, you could fund affordable housing, but it has to be within a qualified census tract as defined through the HUD program. So I believe we're down to one small area in town that is actually over by CJ's at Ames Street. Over by Ames Street is the only small census tract that we have left in town that would meet that qualification. So if there was a parcel or a project within that census tract, that could be a potential avenue for using this funding. But we couldn't just say we want to do an affordable housing project anywhere in town. It's got to meet that qualifying designation related to location first.
Can I interject here too? The National League of Cities webinar said that, and this is maybe something that we should talk about too, there are ways around the qualified census tract. It's just a different set of paperwork. You have to prove that you're putting the money into affordable housing. So, and this is something that maybe if we're going to look into creative funding, my thought was that part of this money we could hire a new position specifically for filling out this paperwork for these dollars, and it might be an opportunity to partner through Quad, so that several towns can use this. Somebody who's an expert in this paperwork. But they did specifically say that you can work around the qualified census tract as long as it is for providing affordable housing. What came to my mind was that house on right beside Town Hall. If we were to upgrade that house, put a new roof on it and do the work that needs to be done, and then have it rented out at an affordable rate, from what it sounded like under their framework, something like that would be something we could do well within the realm of affordable housing. And then the other option is that the stipulations say that you can transfer your money to a nonprofit or to another state entity, but it said, I think most state entities except for counties. So if we wanted to decide on an affordable housing investment in Matthews, if we figured out an amount to transfer to a nonprofit that works in that realm, that's an option too.
So definitely a lot to explore related to that. But again, certainly not something that is currently included in the FY22 budget. So I don't think it's something that needs to be trying to settle it now, especially with not having the final guidance. But yeah, there's some interesting options there. So revenue loss that I referenced previously, they have a couple of pages worth of formulas within the interim guidance that gives you a couple of options to either utilize your actual revenue losses, or you can use their percentages that they outline. So you kind of go through each process and figure out which one works to your benefit. But to Hazen's point, we may only have kind of little bits and pieces of lost revenue as opposed to that really being a big needle mover for us. The webinar that I sat through, it was a little convoluted, and there was some continuing confusion on what funds do you actually utilize to calculate revenue loss. So do you just take your entire general fund? Do you take certain lines? How do you back out? We took out a loan and we had some loan proceeds. So that shows as a revenue, but that's not a real revenue as far as something that we would have year over year. So we do have to work through that. And then to Renee's point earlier, get some clarification on what we can do with the tourism fund. But again, going back to this broad latitude, it's only after we go through those formulas that we're able to then say, okay, this is our revenue loss, and this $500,000 is now what we have broad latitude to use on. We can use that funding on infrastructure maintenance. We can use it on pay-go projects. So we could build a road. We could potentially hire additional public safety staff if we wanted to. It's a very finite pool of funding out of that $9+ million. So at this point, I would be very cautious and even trying to take a swag at it until we know what lines we're actually trying to calculate. The last thing we would want to do is come in too low or come in too high and give the board false hope or false pessimism over what we might actually be looking at as far as that pool of money is indicating. But it is something that that's really going to be the loosest part of this pool of funding as far as we can see. So there is a provision in the interim guidance related to premium pay for essential workers. To Ken's point, this is something that we did previously. We have not been doing it in the current fiscal year, but that is something that is available within this pool of money, but it is not something that we have budgeted in fiscal year 22. So it's something that we see as a separate conversation. If the board was interested in that, it does not have to be part of the budget process. So that's something to come later. Related to infrastructure, it is really categorized into 3 areas, specifically water, sewer, and broadband. There is one mention in the interim guidance about stormwater, which gave us some hope that water and sewer also means stormwater. We want additional clarification on that before we get too excited, but that could be an opportunity for some significant expenditures. That is in an area that we do work, and we do have quite a backlog of projects that currently don't have identified funding. But our current stormwater revenue is a restricted revenue. So we're really not helping the general fund if we use the ARP funding for stormwater projects. We're helping our stormwater fund, which isn't bad, but doesn't help kind of crack this other nut related to general fund funding for our expenditures. But otherwise, really no need to put a lot of detail. We're not in the water, sewer, and broadband business. So ineligible uses. This is definitely something to pay attention to. You cannot use the funding to offset tax cuts. And what that means is we couldn't go lower than 28 cents and then pay ourselves back. So it doesn't have anything to do with the proposal that we have for this year. They're talking about going lower than where you are existing. So we don't have to worry too much about that. You are limited. You cannot use this for pension funds. And the interesting one, you cannot deposit it into rainy day funds. So something that we had been hoping to do was being able to say, okay, we had to use our fund balance for some things last year because of COVID. We get to pay ourselves back, replenish our savings account. That is explicitly denied within the wording of this. Their thought is that they want the dollars to be put to use. And so they don't want it sitting in a savings account for some future project. They want the dollars being put out into the community. So that is not something that we will be able to do with the funding. And then again, we cannot fund general infrastructure spending unless it is under that revenue loss provision that we've discussed now here a couple times. So the bottom line, love to be the bearer of kind of bad news, but we will continue to monitor this for clarifications, interpretations of the interpretations. Certainly, when the final guidelines come out, there will, I'm sure, then be additional information as well. But as of today, we really don't see the ARP funding as a blanket solution to fund increased reoccurring operational expenses within our proposed FY22 budget. If there is an opportunity to use any of the dollars for that purpose, just keep in mind those dollars are going to be competing for your one-time infrastructure costs. So it's under that revenue loss provision. If we're able to carve out even $1 million or $2 million from this 9.7, that little pot of money is going to be kind of where we can do anything on a more free basis. So some of these one-time infrastructure projects, greenways, paving, road construction, things like that, they're going to be competing for the same part of this money. So with that, we do recommend that the FY22 budget uses what we would call confirmed revenue sources, simply because this is just so unconfirmed. And to Commissioner Miller's point earlier, we're just not going to have that confirmation by the time the budget vote has to come in order to have everything in place for the next fiscal year. So with that, certainly happy to answer any other questions, but that is the state of things as we currently understand it.
I just have another comment. I think every hamlet, burg, town, city, municipality in the country is getting millions and millions of dollars. So I don't think at some point down the road, the feds are going to be coming after Matthews to recoup their funds. So I want to be as liberally interpret these rules as possible, and again to use every cent we possibly can. It would be a real shame to return these funds. I think we have to be really creative and figure out how to use them.
Also, I think at the offset, the beginning, these are pretty stringent, and I think what's going to happen is what we're doing tonight, all of North Carolina is going to be doing, and it's going to come to realization that we got some money that we need to use, but they got too many restrictions on it, because I know, number one, infrastructure is something everybody can do. We need to fix roads and build roads or repair roads. And, you got some affordable homes in there. That's the hardest thing all around everywhere. But I believe in about 60 days after, too late, after it's not too late. Anytime you can get it, but at the same time, I believe some of these restrictions are going to ease up and change, and be some more things that we'll be able to do, get more clarity of what we can, because what you talked about is sewer and water. We know sewer and water is tied to roads and to communities. So that's an avenue that I'm hoping and praying. I know that the PPP loan had a lot of restriction when they first came out, but once they got out, then they sort of reduced some of them back to a lot. So let's just hope that that's be the occurrence here, so that we could take full advantage of this $9 million plus that's been allotted to us.
Okay. I want to thank Becky for our hard work. That's a lot to absorb, 151 pages. So I want to thank Becky for that. We did want to mention something to the board about moving the public hearing date. Originally, we'd scheduled it for Monday, the 24th. We'd like to move that to June 14th. We have a standard that we advertise the budget public hearings 10 days prior, and we are not able to meet that standard. So holding the public hearing on June 14th will allow us to continue this best practice. It is not a law that you give 10 days notice, but that's what we've always done. And I think, given what we're going through this year, that we should just move the public hearing back to the first meeting in June as opposed to May 24th. Any concerns? Okay.
That's good.
Okay, good.
It's a planning meeting. I don't know if that would draw it out longer or what the agenda would look like at that point, but
It could, yes, it could. All right, so Mayor, now what I thought we'd do is take a deeper, really kind of go wherever the board wants to go. We've answered the questions from the meeting on the 10th. We've given you all an update on the ARP funds. So we wanted to spend some time, and some budgets or departmental budgets are very straightforward, same as last year's status quo. And then there's others that have changes, and we wanted the board to be able to have an opportunity to do that. One of the things that was brought up, I think very fairly brought up, is you see that $597,000 in y'all's operating costs. And so we are going to do a budget amendment and shift those funds away from a governing board into economic development and fire. So with your board, so one of the things with your budget, the salaries are the same. Y'all's salaries are the same as they were. If you guys give us different direction, obviously we will abide by that. But I did want to let you know your salaries are flat.
I have a question on that. Mayor, and this is for you. You did not want us to get a salary increase this first 2 years, but you said you would support the next board getting a pay raise. Are you still in favor of that?
I'm supportive of the consensus of this board.
Well, you know, I brought it up. It's 6 years since this board had a raise. I think we did some $5,500 is what we're getting paid now based, and is it 36? And
48 months times 150.
Yes, $3,600
technical.
technology allowance, yes.
And I think the last time we did the research, I believe that I'm thinking that it was around about $9,000. What the other anybody remember that? Huh? I know Pineville's getting 9,000.
We could bring back information to the board if y'all would like that.
Yeah, and what Commissioner Whitley's speaking of is we talked of the possibility of this board voting for, if this was a consensus to do this, would be voting for an increase for a future board and not for ourselves. So that's what the thought was, but
well, I don't,
really up to,
you know,
up to the,
my thinking is that if the other towns have gotten theirs up, and we still been 6 years since this board had a raise, and I think it's only behooving that we come up to the same thing. It's not a substantial amount of money, and I know none of us took this for the salary. We took it to be a service, but at the same time, during the COVID, it's been a difficult time and a lot of time, and I know we hadn't come out, but now we're coming back to be back out, possibly next month. But I just think the future board would 2020 would appreciate being equally deserving as all the surrounding town. I would like to see what the other towns were. I know what we look like, but I like to see it in paper key.
Okay, so we could do a survey similar to what we did last year on pay rates for elected officials in other towns.
And if we can find last year's report and just add on another annual to see if any of them
Exactly.
That's good.
received an increase, it'd be helpful.
Okay, the next one is the manager's budget. That is a status quo as well. We are continuing the monthly digital newsletter and training for staff. And then, of course, that large operating numbers, COVID CARES Act related. Any questions or about that? Okay, human resources. Human resources, I want to give kudos to Tanya for really working hard to create a pretty darn flat budget. We are excited about that. And then I think the topic that we got a lot of discussion on last meeting is about this 32,000 for targeted recruitment. And we're going to have a special board meeting with the board to really talk about this whole area about town recruitment and how we're doing and what, our hiring processes and things like that. And we are searching for a date that works for everybody. We were trying to focus on the first week in June. That is starting to fall apart or potentially fall apart. So we may look at the next week in June when we have some conflicts already with that. So we need to get together and talk about that because I know it's important to this board.
I have a question on that, and I know we're going to get together on the hiring practices, but the initial where it says fully funded for human resources net 37,400, is that the 32 included in that as well too, or not? Those two different things.
Two different things.
So you're looking at an increase in 3,200 target for recruiting and fully. Now, what is that?
So you're talking about what is the human resource management system?
Yes, sir.
What are we getting for that? So Tanya, you want to talk a little bit about that?
So the human resources management system is, the human resources management system is UltiPro, the UKG contract that you all approved a few months. It's the human resources management system, the UKG contract that you all authorized the manager to enter into a couple months ago, and we are heavy in implementation of that right now.
I got you.
So the offset of that, Commissioner Whitley, we're able to drop some existing softwares that we currently have things kind of all over the place. And this is kind of one comprehensive system. So it'll reduce the costs of some of those other programs. So the net increase to the budget is the 37.4. The 37.4.
Okay, just for recruiting, and I'm really big on recruiting. In this $3,200, I don't have no problem with us allowing that if that's what the board want to do. But I want, what are your idea of recruiting? What does recruiting mean to you? I know what it means to me, but I want to know if 32,000 is that. What are you planning to do on recruiting, and what are you recruiting?
So the $32,000 is to continue to advertise at some of the places that we have recently started advertising. That includes Q City Metro, which is their predominant readership is African American. The Charlotte Agenda, which is a Charlotte local. It's really geared towards a younger population, a very diverse younger population. The Hispanic League, to obviously get the word out to the Hispanic community, the Asian Chamber of Commerce, to get the word out to the Asian community. With the implementation of UltiPro, we will have to pay separate to continue to advertise on governmentjobs.com, but since we'll be getting rid of NeoGov, so part of that money will be spent for that. And then we're discussing adding minorityjobs.com. We've reached out to them to figure out what's involved in that. We have not heard back, but we're trying to pursue that. And then looking at placing some ads on diversity.com. Diversity.com is a nationwide kind of all-inclusive advertising board. So it doesn't make sense to post all of our jobs on there because they'll just get lost. But some of our higher paying jobs that we cast a much wider net for, it may make sense for us to use that website for posting. And then there's some extra money in there for industry specific job postings. So if there's, job boards or minority job boards or whatever to hit a targeted community based on the actual job, then there's some extra money in there to do that as well.
Is there actually going to be anybody going out recruiting?
Well, the police department has Officer A, and that's what he does all the time. As far as actual HR staff, I can't make a promise to that. There's two of us, and we're supporting the entire town. We're doing the best we can do, but we are we're buried in work.
I mean, I hope this isn't insensitive, but we spent $37,000 to take the load off of you guys. Shouldn't that help mitigate you to have more time? I mean, I may be completely off base, but wasn't that the point of the new software?
Well, I think we'll get into a discussion about this at our meeting specifically about this topic, but I think the concern is, quote unquote, the bang for the buck. You know, we can look at, okay, what are our jobs that come available? Then let's say going to HBCUs and talking to those folks. And then, okay, what are we recruiting for? I think we need to have a discussion about that. I mean, I think just to use a Charlotte example, if I were the Charlotte Planning Department, who's got, as I understand it, more people in their planning commission than we have in our entire town, they may have 10 or 12 entry-level positions, right? Well, okay, let's go, guys. Let's go, hit some of these universities up. Whereas for us, we don't have that. We have a whole different kind of need for our organization. So I think we can spend a lot of time talking about it, kind of taking a deeper dive into looking what our positions are and where we need to recruit. I do think it's in our interest to create as diversified a applicant pool as possible and diversify the workforce over time.
I know I was in college when I was recruited for the Highway Patrol. Trooper Richard Holden came to A&T and set up and was recruited because at that time the North Carolina Highway Patrol was grossly under diversified in minorities. I think I applied, he came down and set up in March of '74, and I applied for that and for the Army first lieutenant, second lieutenant in the Army, because I wanted a career that I could retire. Well, I applied and I was hired in August with the Highway Patrol, and I was the 18th minority hired in the state of North Carolina. But if he had not been on site or have a person, now recruiting is what you want to recruit for. Now, I know you heard you say that, which officer is it with the police department to recruit? ACOG.
No, Officer A, Dustin A.
Okay, and I know he does, but if the police department is the only agency that is recruiting, and it's evident, it's showing because I see what they're recruiting and bringing on, but you got to be, and this word, I want this word to resonate, intentional of what you're recruiting for. Now, the Highway Patrol was intentional in making sure they hired some people of color in the Highway Patrol, and they did that. And if it had not been, I don't know if I would have applied, because I don't think I would have went right out and did. But at the same time, the police department, and I give kudos to Chief Pennington, he is actively making sure that his department is diversified and looks as if to make up a thing. Now, and I think that we cannot put all of the responsibility on the police department to do all of our work or do all of our recruitment, and let the police department be the only department in this town that's doing diversity and recruiting. They're doing a good job. But I think there's room in HR that we can designate some of this money to make sure somebody go to that schools. We got schools locally, close by. A&T is where I went to, and Teresa, just from Winston-Salem State, HBC school, to make sure that you can find people or tell them what you're looking for. And there are some people there that can meet that bill so that you have a pool that you can pull from. Does that make sense?
Commissioner Whitley, it makes a lot of sense. I think the key is, what are the positions that are available that we have? And I think the smart thing to do is we can take a year look back and just look at all of our positions, and then kind of have that discussion, because we are a very small organization that like the Highway Patrol, I don't know, what do they bring in, 60 recruits a year? It's a whole different, and it's like the Charlotte Police Department, the Charlotte Fire Department. Those are completely different organizations from what we have, but we're happy to have a discussion about that with the board when we talk about really this topic specifically.
And I agree, concur with you, Hazen. And I guess what I got so upset about of the week was that I know how important vacant positions is. They come far and far in between. I understand that. So when you have a vacancy, that was my concern, that I was hoping when you said that you and the staff is guided and you're looking at diversify. And I mean, you don't take a rocket scientist. You know what I'm saying? I'm going on 70 years old, and I've been through some racial situations that I hope nobody ever had to go to. And I'm speaking personal, because someone was very hurtful, and they remind me when I see them come again. But anything that I'm a part of, and I'm a part of this, I'm part of this team. And I say this, I'm part of this team. And I would like to make sure that Matthews, because I've lived here probably longer than anybody else. I've been here 33 years in this town. And I have given 11 years of my public service as a state trooper on the road, here working and protecting Mecklenburg County and Matthews, because I lived in Matthews these 33 years. I just want to make sure that we do the very best we can. When the opportunity presents itself, then we can make sure.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay. And I think we can have a deep dive into this conversation in a couple weeks.
Okay. Thank y'all.
Okay. So finance is the next department. It is a very, there's 3 full-time folks over there.
Teresa, what's up with this budget? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You've been with us a week, I think.
Yeah. So, anyways, we do get this excellence award from GFOA, and then our audit does show our fund balance continues to be very healthy. And information technology, that is again a very flat status quo budget. I can't stress enough, all of us have to be vigilant about malware, including the board. You guys have clicked on stuff improperly. I have too, by the way. Everybody in here has, I think. Not Tanya. Okay. Well, good.
But a guy from Nigeria said I was going to get $1 million.
I wanted to put my snacks in, and I'm just sorry that somebody tricked me that I didn't want to put my snacks in.
And I've told Wayne to get sneakier and sneakier, because we got the pipeline. There's another town somewhere that recently got hit. San Diego. So they are coming for us. Which chief? Davidson. Man, that's quiet. I didn't know that. I'd like to give Jamie some grief about that, but may come back to haunt me. Information technology. I think I've skipped around here a little bit, have I? Okay, I'm still okay. Okay. So risk and safety and risk management.
Can we go back to information technology for a second?
Yeah, sure.
One of the big topics of conversation during the Colonial Pipeline fiasco was whether or not organizations and towns adequately back up their data. Do you think we're doing a good job of that? I mean, if we were to be ransomed, could we tell them to go pound sand and say we've got our data over here? And
we do daily backups to the extent of even manually taking a backup home. Our information technology manager will physically remove the latest backup and carry it home with him. So unless his home burns down and town hall burns down in the same night, we've got a pretty decent system down. So he's very conscientious of that. We also benefit from not having the utilities and the online bill payments, and it keeps our system more closed. Not to say that we're immune, but it does close off some of the avenues that the bad guys have been successful with in some other communities.
So under safety and risk management, last year we switched to the league. I think we've been satisfied with that. So we were a little weary, I think, at first, but that's turned out to be good, and a good relationship and a good money saver too. So very flat budget this year. All right, the next department is police. So here's an example of where we are asking for 4 new officers, related vehicles and equipment. We're asking for 10 vehicles. We're asking for a crime scene, contracted crime scene technician positions, $50,000, and then reclassifying telecommunicators for $25,000. And the chief is joining us. Chief Pennington is joining us from his vacation. Where does the board, what kind of questions does the board have about this?
So Hazen,
Yes, sir.
10 new police vehicles, you say 3 funded in FY21. So is it not 7 new police vehicles? Or are you trying to just get back to 10?
What we're having to do is take the 3 vehicles that you appropriated the money this year and shift it into next year. So there's 10 vehicles in next year's budget, and then 4 for the 4 new police officers if you go that route. Yes.
So you're rolling the 3 over to get to the 10, basically, from FY21
Yes.
to FY22.
So there's funding in this police budget for the 10, and then there's an offsetting revenue to fund 3 of them. So there's only an expenditure that hits our general fund bottom line for 7.
Because you pre-funded 3 of them this
Okay.
fiscal year.
And what would our normal ask for police cars? Let's take the 4 aside because you're talking about new positions.
So we need to go to 10 vehicles. We up until recently, we were at 7. What we're finding is the Dodge Chargers are not holding up. And so now we've gone to the SUVs. Dodge Chargers are falling apart, and we're asking for more money in the police maintenance budget, fleet maintenance budget, because of this. And we need to get at least a 10 a year so we can rotate. We'll be on a 7-year cycle.
So when do we get rid of the Chargers? When is the delta where you're kind of putting out there more to overcome a deficiency? Is this 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
I don't know statistically. I think the police department is very concerned. I mean, we've changed out motors. We've spent a lot of money. To me, it's a simple matter of the slug of capital, right? The slug of money you need to, does anybody know how many Chargers we got? Chief,
I don't have that number. I want to say it's somewhere around 30, but the point is like as you rotate, right, on a 7-year, 120,000 mile rotation,
Clark, we can barely hear you. Can you try to speak up?
Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Let me redo. I apologize. I don't know. Sisk, you're there. Why don't you take that over?
Okay, we're good. No, we're good. We can hear you. We can hear you well now. Clark.
So my point is like you're looking at a 7-year recycle plan, right? So as the staffing has increased, you look at about 70 cars within the fleet. We're going to have to rotate that out at about 10 cars per year to give you that 7-year cycle. So the other part of this is with those 30 plus Dodge Chargers we have, our maintenance cost is significantly increasing. So with us entering into this enterprise plan, it's obviously helping us a little bit in offsetting that cost. So as we move, what's the number on that? We're looking at maybe 3 to 4, maybe 5 years before we get out of these Dodge Chargers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we actually have cars older than the Chargers, so we still have Crown Vics. We have still have.
That's a good point. Yeah, in Hazen, we also have Impalas. We have cars that are much older than the newer Chargers. The problem is the Chargers came in and they're not holding up to the standard of the old police package vehicles. So yeah, that's a good point.
We need to convert to Toyota Camry. No one would know it's a cop car.
If they build a police package car, sir, I'd jump in with you.
So, I mean, what I can do, I mean, so what the reason for the reason we're asking for the 4 is because we did a staffing study in 2018, and these 4 officers would give us 7 per shift, which is what was recommended in the 2018 staffing study. You know, what we're dealing with is a growing community population and service calls. I know we've seen a significant increase in service calls. You know, we've got significant increases in large apartment complexes. We want to make sure our response times continue. I think another factor that I don't think can be underappreciated here is kind of this wear and tear on the agency morale. Police, as I think we've all seen, and of course some police officers have made mistakes too, but police is under a lot of stress. We do want to make sure that they are taken care of. I do once again want to appreciate Tanya for bringing our attention to beef up our EAP, Employee Assistance Program, to give officers a lot more opportunities to seek help and talk, make sure they're getting help when they need it. We need to make sure it's properly maintained. Obviously, the department, and then we need to have the appropriate vehicles for these officers too. So that's where the request came from, to add 4 staff persons. Chief, do you want to add anything to what I've said?
I do. I just want to throw a little data at you. So if you look at 2011, we were sitting at about 1.41 officers per 1,000 in the patrol division. We're currently sitting at 1.11. We've seen a significant increase in the population of Matthews, but we've seen a significant standalone of the number of officers in patrol division. So we have got to manage that 1.369, which has been recommended in 2018. Every time the population grows and we don't add officers to patrol division, we're reducing that number of officers per 1,000, which, to Hazen's point, we're increasing the workload on those patrol officers. We're increasing the stress. We're increasing the lack of opportunity to go to de-escalation training, to use of force training, to whatever those professionalized trainings we need to send these guys to. We're losing that opportunity because we have to manage a coverage base in patrol that we just don't have. So these 4 officers get us to a 2018 study and still keeps us below the 1.369, but it gets us to that operational study in 2018 that puts 7 patrol officers per patrol squad. We have a 4-person minimum staffing in the whole town of Matthews, 4-person patrol officers. That gives 3 people the opportunity for vacation, sick leave, and training. And that's a very low number. So if we can get to this 2018 study, we have a plan moving forward that we presented at the last mini conference that would allow us to move that number, or that minimum staffing, or that number in patrol forward to get us to that 3.69. Really, it's about that data.
I don't have a problem with the 4 officers nor the 4 cars. I just want to know when we get the burden of the charges off our backs. And so I'm thinking about 5 years, they're all junk from that aspect of it. I mean, because I will tell you, it was 2 weekends ago, maybe 3 weekends ago, I called on Saturday evenings, probably your hottest night. And dispatch said, "Sorry, Commissioner Urban, we're all tied up. We can't get to you." And so had I had something life-threatening, that would have been a serious issue. So it was pretty surprising that occurred. And I'd hate to have any citizen have that brought upon them to say, "We can't get to you." So they did eventually, but in a serious situation. And I'm noticing more and more sort of road rage, more speeders, and taking a lot more liberties in and around town. And they're not citizens. I know they're the people passing through.
Yeah, I'm on board with that as well, because the town has grown, and as the town grows, we have to fill these slots. And I know what Chief is saying when he's trying to staff 7 per shift. It's and you don't have it. It's service call, and it is. This area is very heavily populated. It don't take you long, just no matter where you go. If you get down Matthew Township Parkway, you come through there. I came through there coming here. It was jam packed all the way through, double lines. So I I know what policing is, and Clark has done a good job, and I'm supportive. And any way we can make sure we can do what we need to do to bring us up to current where we are. I know we're running behind, but at least we can get up to where we can be sort of stable with it. Clark, one question on your reclassification telecommunicator. How far behind are we on our telecommunicator?
And I got Tanya on the line. I know we did a study about 6 months, 8 months ago. This 5% or whatever this dollar amount works out to, it's going to get us up to about standard. We're losing people to Union County Sheriff's Office or Union County Communications for 20 cents an hour. When you're talking about a small dollar amount that these individuals are getting paid, and though that's 20 or 30 cents an hour, that's a significant amount of money. We've got to get to a standard where we are competitive in the market. One of the changes we made several years ago is we professionalized our communication system, where all of our communicators are now Sheriff Standards qualified, which is the gold standard for communications, and which, by the way, the state has now moved to, which thank goodness we did it about 2 years ago. But the point is when they get that certification, they're the gold standard. Like, other organizations are wanting to pull them away because we professionalize that system. And they're getting offered more money. We've got to be competitive. This $25,000 will put us in a more competitive market. I don't know what it would put us at, and Tanya, you may have the documentation, but it's going to put us about mid-range. Right now, we're way below, and that's where we want to correct.
So the average telecommunicator makes just under $40,000 a year. The average raise would be 5%, so it'd be about $2,000.
Right. But just to kind of echo what Clark's saying a little bit, what we look at is the hiring salary. And, Clark talked about that they're now required to be Sheriff Standards certified. So once they get that certification, they're not being hired at these other agencies at the entry level rate anymore. They're being hired in at a higher rate. So while we're comparing to the entry level rate, that's not what agencies are poaching them away from us for. They're poaching them away for higher dollar values.
I got you.
And Commissioner Urban, just to go back to your prior question about Dodge Chargers, I pulled up an old fleet list. It's got a little bit of age on it, but it looks like we purchased our last Charger in 2017. So we started transitioning to the Explorers, and then are completely at the Explorers now. But there is a 2017 Charger on this list. So we are a couple of years out before we would be cycling all of them through the system to get them to the hopefully more reliable Explorer.
2024.
Yeah, it's disappointing to know those cars aren't performing well. They look nice. They look really nice.
They look good on the side of the road with nobody in it.
I just like to make a comment. I think one of our biggest responsibilities as an elected board is to make sure our citizens stay safe. And even though Clark might have been whispering in the dispatcher's ear to, hey, that's Urban, tell him you're not available. I know, Chief wouldn't do that, and that is something that's very concerning. And so I support the budget for the police. Absolutely, I think very, very necessary, and we want to make sure that, in all seriousness, if we don't ever want to be in a situation where we don't have enough employees to react to situations here in town. So we're getting up to the recommended number, and we want our officers to have new and better vehicles to drive in that are trustworthy. So I support this budget for the police. Some of the other budgets we'll talk about, but.
But policing is not just allotted to us, a shortage. I don't know if y'all saw the Aaron in Mecklenburg County on the State Highway Patrol. We allotted 38 troopers and we're down to 32. Raleigh is allotted 50 state troopers, and Charlotte is a whole lot bigger than Raleigh. And I know our Representative Logan was first female state trooper here, and she was advocating, and I don't know if y'all saw that, advocating that Raleigh would realign Mecklenburg County so that we could at least get up to 50 But there again, hiring and recruiting, because I know Eddie Cathy, I know him personally, and I know Eddie is offering more money, and he's drawing more people away from this area to come to work for Union County Sheriff Department and every avenue. So it's not just Matthew, but it's on giving for everywhere.
And I would like to make a point to that, Commissioner Whitley. I agree with you. Like, we are seeing our application pool definitely lessening, but the recruitment, the putting out the information to the other organizations and where we're kind of trying to pull from by Officer A and especially by our HR director. I got to give her credit in this, and I can't sit back and not kind of push what she's done to help us in our recruitment. Our hiring process was redone about 3 years ago. About 2 years ago, she and I sat down, we went through the entire hiring process, our application procedures, the way that we asked questions, all of that has been redone to ensure that we're getting the best applicants, because we are still getting a decent pool, not nearly as good as we were 3 or 4 years ago due to the situation that's happening. But we are, you might have seen most recently, we hired Garcia, our latest recruit that we just hired on, Cynthia Garcia, absolutely phenomenal recruit, and we're excited about her future.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
What I do want to say with the board, I know budgets are very tough, and I know public safety is very important, but if the board comes back and says, okay, we want these 4 officers, find it in the existing budget, we could not do that without going to raises. That's the only thing I know to go to, which raises are about $350,000, 3% raise about $350,000. So I think you got to get settled in that in your brain. If nobody can have it all their ways, I guess. And these 4 people and these 4 vehicles, these 4 things on this sheet in front of you, in staff's opinion, necessitates a tax increase.
So are we just 100% writing off the ARP funds as if we don't have them at all?
I don't think we can do it in this fiscal year. That's the problem, right? I think we'll turn over every stone. I think I'll put Becky Hawk up against probably anybody in the country finding us the money. But things may change in 2 weeks, but the final rules aren't going to be finalized until July 16th. So there may be a lot of talk, there may be a lot of smoke, but until it's a final rule, we're not going to know for sure. And I think it would be a grave mistake to say, okay, yeah, we're going to hire these 4 people and, good luck on the ARP funds.
Well, it's also going to be unfortunate if we raise taxes and a month later we get a $2 or $3 million windfall.
But we've seen no indication of that, right? If there was some kind of indication, I'd say I'm willing to take the chance, but I haven't seen any indication of that.
But wasn't there, couldn't you turn around and divide it by the 35,000 residents and pump it back to them? Frankly, it is our money, correct? You raise taxes, a windfall comes in, you've got your limited situation, say, you know what? The people who put up with this and had the most burdens, the taxpayers, let's give it back to them.
If you wanted to take the ARP funding and, give every property owner, $45 or whatever that equivalent tax increase cost was, yeah, you could use the ARP funds for that purpose.
But I think my personal opinion is, if I don't know and I'm hedging a bet, I'm going worst case scenario, I'm assuming we don't have any ARP funding. Somewhere down the road, you're going to figure it out, but it's not going to happen for the budget. And like all of us, if we have a budget and we have a due date to it, we can't have the sort of like, oh, well, it's coming. It just may not. I'm still waiting for my tax refund, right?
I am too.
So,
what are these refunds you speak of?
that's right.
I'm not familiar with that.
All right, anybody have any questions or comments for the chief? I think the chief wants to take his family to a Dodgers baseball game. So, okay.
Yeah.
I do want to ask one quick question that's not specific to the chief, but again, and I hate to dwell on this webinar that I watched, but they mentioned hiring incentives for essential workers. And I think the definition of essential workers was included police and fire or people who can't telecommute to work. And so if we wanted to offer hiring incentives, does that have to be written into the budget, or is that something we would adopt later? Because I feel, I guess, more confident in our ability to spend these ARP funds than I'm hearing. But, how does that work out? How do we?
Yeah, so great question, Commissioner. The tax rate is set, but like if we wanted to change a policy and said let's do some recruitment incentives and $50,000 from our funding or $50,000 from general fund, fund balance, we could do that. So that wouldn't be a problem amending that anytime next fiscal year. Okay.
Can I make a suggestion, please?
Yes, sir.
We're exactly halfway through. Can we take a 5-minute break or thereabouts? I need to get a pad of paper because I'm converting to paper and pen now for notes and things. And I have some questions, but I can't read it off the back of my newspaper.
Yeah, sure. Right, absolutely.
5 minutes, 10 minutes? What do you want to do?
All right, Hazen, is that questions for me or is he going to?
Are there any pads in here in the?
No.
Just one.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clark.
I would like to know at some point from you, Chief Pennington, what you think about hiring incentives and how that would affect your department, if it would improve response and stuff like that. And you don't have to get back to me right now. You can get to your game.
Got it right. I got it right. We did a study on this. Actually, Captain Sis, that's sitting in the audience, he and I kind of worked on hiring incentives. We have a whole program that we sent to HR that we're evaluating right now. So I appreciate that question.
I look forward to reading it. Thank you.
Roy, if you send me that incentive.
I have it, Hazen. I'll send it off to you guys. I'll send it to you and then you can forward it to the board if you don't mind.
Yeah, do I have that? Please send it to me. Please send it. One penny. Get 500,000. Penny and a half.
All to do, take a break.
Yeah, I suggested a 5-minute break because I need a pad of paper. I didn't even know we were meeting in person. I didn't know. Nobody told me.
Yeah, I said, man.
Do it. Boom.
Okay, so the next department after police is fire and EMS. Chief Kenneberg's here, and so Chief, let me see how I can set this up. Okay, so the big mover, Idlewild and the volunteer fire department really stay the same. The big mover is the proposed deputy chief and related vehicle. I guess the thing I would say to kick it off is we don't have a department. We have a department of 27 paid people, but we also have 34 volunteers and trained probationary, 27, and then I'm kind of messing up the numbers here, but a total department of 85 people. And if you look at, we surveyed 10 other departments similar to us, and the average for, these are called chief positions, chief officers, we have 1.2. That's one is the chief, and the 0.2 is Jay Gurian, who's part-time and does some kind of administrative work with chief. But the average for these other departments that are about our size is 5.7 chief officers. So we're way understaffed. You know, Kenneberg is on his second career.
Good job, Rob.
Highly acclaimed from Charlotte, but he's creating a culture that I want to make sure gets implemented into the organization. And in my view, we need a deputy chief to help with succession planning to make sure, you know, chief retires whenever, somebody's there to keep it going for another 10 years or whatever. That's how you really create great culture. You don't do it overnight or 2 years or something like that. So Chief, what else do you want to talk about from the need from a deputy chief standpoint?
I think Hazen hit the nail on the head. It's the deputy chief is equivalent to a captain position in the police department. We are sorely deficient administratively and incident management without the addition of the deputy chief. The vehicle for the deputy chief is needed. Going back to the police car discussion, we got back a 2008 Crown Vic the other day because a not as old Impala didn't make it very far. So we are in sore need of vehicles.
Clark's got a nice Dodge Charger for you.
They got one out there with no engine and no suspension under it. So, but we've trimmed operating expenses. Operating expenses are $13,000 over the 7-year average. Volunteer expenses were trimmed by $27,000 by using unspent or projecting unspent volunteer stipend money. So we trimmed the total budget by about $50,000 in operating and volunteer side. That comes back as capital. We're continuing to try to find economies. You approved a rescue truck. We are trying desperately to buy as much of the capital equipment for the rescue this year. We'll talk about some other initiatives that we've got underway that are all included in this year or next year's budget. So the total raise was about $13,000 in operating cost and the deputy chief.
Can I ask a question? Chief, when you did your fire awards, I felt like almost everybody that you gave an award to was either working at a different department or maybe wasn't with your department anymore. Are you seeing a big turnover in staff? And if so, where are they going? And then on top of that, what would it take to maintain or retain your staff?
We still lose 1 to 2 career people each year. There's tremendous competition in the region for certified firefighters. So just like the police department's telecommunicator issue where they get sheriff's department certification, we take on a volunteer, invest about 2 years in them. They get firefighter and EMT certification, and now they're a very hireable commodity. You are correct. 24 members of Matthews have gone on to full-time employment somewhere else through our volunteer program. 11 of the 24 are currently our career members. We entertained changing to part-time, but our system won't allow that because we're a municipality. The ARP funding would have provided 6 additional firefighter positions, but without the ARP money, I guess that's a moot point at this point. But we've regionally, between Matthews, Mint Hill, Stallings, and Hemby Bridge, over the next 5 years, we will all hire approximately 100 people. So to Mr. Whitley's point, we got to change what we're doing or we're only going to get the same thing again. But that requires, I'm going to get on my soapbox, that requires a commitment on the behalf of the board to hire, then train, then put people through a probationary period and see if they stay. CFD has been using that model since the 70s. They have gone from absolutely no turnover in the recruit program to about 20% turnover at the end of a year through the hire and train. It's a generational thing. And, you know, to Larry's point, me going to Johnson C. Smith and recruiting for a $37,000 a year job just doesn't pan out. There are many more higher paying jobs in the community. So we've got to do something different if we're going to continue to feed the need of the fire service in the area.
Clark, is that, I mean, Rob, is that what we starting? That's what it's fire to start off at?
About 37,000, yes.
Chief, what's realizing that there's the third station sitting out there in probably a 3 to 5 year window in some form or fashion. What do you have to do to spool up for that? Because it's not like you open the building and you just put people into it. So my guess is at some point prior to that, you're bringing on staff that's going to be dedicated to that station. What is that spool up time?
Well, actually, we're going to talk about that tomorrow afternoon. You know, we're trying to track Mint Hill. Mint Hill's building a second station on Lawyers Road. Collectively, we would like to hire 18 people between the two departments 2 years out from opening. And then hire 12 people 2 years out, 1 year out from opening. That's 15 for the station in each department. We would also have to do a promotional process for a station officer on each shift. So, you know, when council says, we haven't even had the Station 3 construction conversation, but supposing you said we want to build Station 3, you have a better idea of the time frame, but we would work back from the expected occupancy date, stage hiring. We've already talked about doing joint recruitment, joint hiring, joint training. Harrisburg, Concord, and Kannapolis have been doing it for several years and gotten great success. They have stopped the leapfrogging from one department to the next because they've standardized pay, they've standardized benefits, and they've standardized training.
Thank you.
I've got a question, I guess, for Becky. Is there any opportunity to pay for some of the Emergency Operations Center cost as well as Rob's time in serving in that capacity due to COVID with the ARP funds?
The short answer is maybe. To Chief's point, they do have the call logs. I think what we've got to do is get really granular with that regarding, you know, is it just a percentage base? of somebody's time? Is it being able to say it's 20 minutes here and 30 minutes there and an hour there, and we're getting into that level of detail? You know, that would take a while to then do some calculations. So that may be some funding that we could reimburse ourselves for, depending on the time period. But the short answer is it's possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in favor of doing that depth of detail, but I think if we could say, take a swag and say 20% of your time was spent, or 10% or whatever.
I know me alone for COVID, 357 hours since March. And I would guess that Tanya's got double that easily. And
Yeah, I mean,
to your earlier question, we're somewhere between 166 and 877 calls that COVID played a role one way or the other that we'd have to go back and look through. But we could do that.
And Chief, have you come up with an incentive policy or some sort of desirable hiring incentive like that Chief Pennington has?
You mean, well, you know, we go back to the 60% of market as our target. I think that's an incentive. In the MAPS study, they recommended an engineer's rank that we chose not to fill. An engineer's rank would provide 6 firefighters with roughly a 10% increase. We chose instead to do a certification incentive program where the 18 firefighters below the rank of lieutenant could earn up to 5% if they apply themselves and get advanced certifications, which is, you know, it's rare in our size department to have that kind of incentive. But we've talked about looking at the value of degrees across the town as an incentive. But I think the key thing is keeping the pay scale moving and keeping competitive. To your earlier question or comment that most of my people work somewhere else, it's not because they can, it's primarily because they have to. At $37,000 a year, you cannot live in Matthews Indian Trail or Stallings unless you're living in an apartment. And that's not conducive to family. So, you know, I'm not suggesting a $50,000 firefighter, but we've got to stay at the top end of the market if we want to attract the best. Anecdotally, we had one opening. We established a pool with our last opening. We went back to the pool for this candidate, and Tanya called me and said, "Why are you picking up number 7?" And the answer was 1 through 6 had already been hired by someone else. So it's very competitive, very competitive.
Of the surrounding 6 municipalities, excluding Charlotte, that have a full-time fire department, how many of them have a deputy fire chief?
Okay, so there are only 2 municipalities that have full-time fire departments, and that's Matthews and Mint Hill. Davidson has permanent part-time chief, deputy chief, and assistant chief. Towns of Huntersville and Pineville are served by independent fire corporations. So only us. And I'm just going to be selfish. I'm the only one who has no rank between the company officer riding the truck and me. So anything you ask for has got to come from me or Heidi.
So, Commissioner Cool, we did do a survey, and we could share this with the board if they're interested. We did a survey of departments really across the state that are either similar in size, population, square miles, number of stations, and I mean, this is pretty lengthy. Chief, did you do this?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is pretty,
Well, that came from a group called NC FRAP. It's the Fire Administrative Assistance Group.
okay. Anyways, what it shows is command, all the way down to officers, volunteers, the whole 9 yards. If if y'all would be interested in this, we'd be happy to, okay, we're going to share this with the board.
And Hazen, are there any changes anticipated if the I don't know what it's called, the insurance for firemen bill passes? In that a more comprehensive insurance policy for firefighters?
Yeah, that's that cancer insurance.
The cancer. So how will that affect this budget?
There's no cost to the town for that legislation.
I think they're going to fund it through the insurance.
Yeah, it's funded the same or through the same mechanism as many of the benefits that go to the fire service across the state. A small percentage of your insurance premium goes to fund the local relief funds. It goes to fund the insurance. It goes into the volunteer firefighter and rescue squad workers pension fund to honor those who have had 20 plus years of service.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions before we move to Public Works? So CJ is asking for 2 positions. One's a facilities maintenance technician, and then the other's a landscape maintenance worker. We're continuing paving at $800,000. That needs to be about $500,000 higher, at least. Got some stormwater management. Some asset management software that we're splitting with stormwater. And then the $23,000 is the increase in vehicle maintenance down at the fleet, and it's related to specifically to police vehicles. So, CJ, you want to talk to the board about your needs?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to go kind of down a similar trip as some of the other departments. So the height of the personnel in Public Works was in 2004. We had 39 people at the time. At the time, our population was 24,000 people. We had roughly 155,000 square feet of building, maintained 87 miles of road, 63 miles of sidewalk, 39 acres of park, 54 police vehicles. Now in 2021, our population has increased by almost 50%. The building square footage has gone up from 150,000 to 212,000. Maintained lane miles has gone from 87 to 100, a little bit over 100. Maintained sidewalks has almost doubled. Parks area maintained has almost doubled, 66 acres. Police vehicles has almost doubled up to 90. And we have lost 4 people in those years. So we're pretty much at a point where we're doing everything we can just to get by. And the facilities that we have are getting older. Back in 2004, Town Hall, Public Works, Police Department, Cruise Rec Center, I may have already said that. They were basically new buildings. They're around 2000. Now they're about 20 years old and requiring a lot of maintenance. This additional facilities maintenance person would help with those increased duties that have come about due to the age of the building and the increase in the maintained square footage of buildings in the town. The same thing for landscape. When we had brought back last year asking to add those flower baskets, we had said this would require another person in landscaping. Since then, we've not only done that, but we also added additional properties to maintain. So we're at our edge of doing what we can do with who we have.
A good example really is the Roundup issue, right? So We're not going to use Roundup at the community gardens, the dog park, or Stumptown Park. But we clearly heard from Carrboro. We talked to those people directly, and how much more labor is involved because simply the organics are not as effective, and you just have more hand labor. Really, as an example, I mean, we've added the 4.5 acres for the future fire station, the dog park. I mentioned that. These things we're mowing these things every 2 weeks. So, I mean, there's a list of all the things we've added, in the last 12 months. So the Greenway, another good example. So there's a real case to be made for another landscape maintenance person and and another facilities maintenance technician.
CJ, where is Albert falling out in all this? How close is he to retirement?
Well, he said one bad day away, but
we all have one bad day
tomorrow.
away. Yes. Yeah.
he has, I think, over 30 years now. So he's eligible for retirement right now.
So is the facilities maintenance technician, is that the game plan to sort of filter in behind him? I mean, I'm just looking because we talk about this year in and year out about continuation of operations and succeeding the next person. And having worked with Albert for many, many years, I'm just curious because he doesn't write anything down. It's all up here, and that's a problem.
Yeah, so that's definitely part of it, is getting somebody else. So we have two people right now. We have Albert and we have Jimmy Boone. Jimmy Boone is fairly close to retirement as well. So we are wanting to get somebody in who understands the buildings, gets to know them. A lot of the efficiencies that we see is because they know, oh, I did this 12 years ago, that probably caused this, and this is why we need to do this. Whereas somebody coming in fresh would have no idea where to even start. They'd be troubleshooting for days just to get to, oh, I know what it is.
And you probably don't keep you as built when you make these changes. Is there any record documentation?
So it depends on the level of what's being changed. So like the HVAC system, we do have as-built of the new systems as we bring them on. But things like changing out, the LED lighting, things that we don't.
Thank you.
I got a question about stormwater. Becky, you said that that's restricted. Can you explain that?
So we charge a stormwater fee to our citizens, and so that revenue that is collected has restricted uses, so it has to go for stormwater related uses. So our stormwater budget, if you go to that specific page in our budget, that is equivalent to the revenue that we receive annually in stormwater fees. So if we were to want to fund a project to lower that amount, we're really just going to leave more money in the stormwater fund. It's really not going to help our general fund.
Go ahead, Jim.
Do I understand from past discussion that we have to have the storms or the street sweeper in order to receive those funds, or those funds go towards the street sweeper as well?
So we have an NPDES permit, that's National Pollution Discharge and Elimination System permit. That's what allows us to discharge water into creeks. As part of that permit, we have to sweep our roads.
Right.
We do use the stormwater funds to pay for that sweeper.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a side comment, I mean, clearly, by any estimation, stormwater is part of the sewer system. It just is. I mean, there's sanitary sewers and stormwater. It's the definition of the sewer.
He's working this ARP, man.
I'm working it, man. Come on, work with me.
We will. I just don't want to get thrown in jail.
Why do you think it
Seems to look good in orange.
No, I will not be the alpha male in jail. Let me just say that. I guess I think it does illustrate, like Public Works, how I think about Ralph Ramsor. He comes up here, he talks to the board, we say XYZ, he's Johnny on the spot, right? He's off, he's running. And I don't know, I see him out there working just as hard as everybody else. And it does feel like they just absorb it. I mean, Mario, I don't work forever, and so I do think it's just, there's some examples here, and landscape is a good example. And then facilities maintenance, we're way understaffed. What the county does, the county contracts it all out. There's no telling what they're spending. But I see those folks downstairs in the library. They replaced the air conditioning units this past year. So, I mean, it is time. This department has been given short shift for a number of years.
CJ, you said you had 4 more positions in 2004. Does that translate over to having the facilities maintenance technician, a landscape maintenance worker, and 2 others, or what's the difference in now and?
Yeah, I don't have the records to know that. I wasn't here in 04. I'm sorry.
All right, any other questions? I think everybody's probably getting a little, budget fatigue here. CJ, is there anything you want to say that you haven't had a chance to say?
Yeah, if you want to give me more, I'm open to that too.
Why is Park and Rec always last?
I was thinking about that too, and everybody's tired too, by the way. It's the P.
We've been last since before I was a commissioner.
Even during meetings, Corey's, okay, it's 11:45. Tell Corey to come.
Really? And we still got the same song. Public Works Sanitation, I do want to keep this on the table for y'all to continue to keep in the forefront of your brain. This is 4 cents on the tax rate. In Cary, North Carolina, they have a 35-cent tax rate, and they charge everybody $20 a month. That probably comes out to about 4 cents. So Cary's tax rate is closer to 39. Ours is 28. We like to think about Cary. They're about to spend $50 million on the downtown park. We're going to share that. Thanks for sharing that, Jay. I'll share that in a weekly update. I do think it's time to think about this. The state law, Senate Bill 111, when it was written 30 years ago, contemplated that solid waste should be a utility, just like water and sewer. And that means you charge people an annual or a monthly rate, depending on kind of how your billing system works. So please keep that in your minds as we go forward. Okay. So planning, Jay, very flat. Anything you want to say?
I'll pass my time to Corey.
Okay. Let's see if we can get to Corey. Economic development, $5,000. That's for the facade grant program. That's all they're asking for. And now we're down to Parks and Recreation. Corey, what do you want to share about Parks and Rec?
This year, I guess no big asks. We do have some pieces of playground equipment and some improvements to the Matthews Community Center. That's the 8A improvement. Was 30,000 of the 34. Beyond that, it is maintaining where we are program-wise. When we sort of designed these numbers, we were honestly unsure about where we'd be programming-wise, especially event-wise. We did add a few additional event items. One event in Percy-Halsey Park, attempting to activate that site. But beyond that, I'll just say the big ask will come in 2023 and 24.
I have a question. I was going through the actual line-by-line budget, and it shows that in fiscal year 21, we spent $60,000 on Beach Fest, yet we didn't have Beach Fest. So what's the explanation for that?
So that was looking at Beach Fest as we were guessing. It was essentially holding 2 Beach Fests or budgeting for it, and we held neither of them because we postponed it to the spring. I'll say we added to 30,000. Again, not knowing. That was a COVID, I guess, action.
So was that money spent, or do you still have that, dollar amount left over? Was that
Majority of that remains. We have had conversations about different ways to use that money, say this year, looking at some improvements with thinking about Stumptown Park. Maybe this is an opportunity to add some more because it is tourism. So things we use it for would have to be tourism related. So it would be some additional decorations, ways to improve the look of the town.
Yeah, I was just curious. I was like, man, we didn't even have it. We spent $60,000. It's like,
no, we didn't spend it.
Okay,
Spend it or just a budget?
Yeah, okay, that's what I wanted. Yeah.
I think Leanne told me we actually did have to pay a couple of the bands or some down payment or something because
We were fortunate they did allow us to use some of that. They refunded. They allowed us to maintain some of our contracts, but we only did lose a small fraction.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah. I mean,
Okay, I'm going to interpret silence to be,
I've got a question.
okay.
Yeah, we didn't have Matthews Alive last year. Can we use ARP funding for that? Not being facetious. I mean, I'm being serious. We didn't have a lot of these things. Can we use ARP funding? That's directly attributable to COVID.
Are you
So what's
talking
the
about
loss
from
of
a
revenue?
revenue loss standpoint?
Can we pay Matthews Alive $60,000 this year with ARP money and not take it out of our budget?
The only allowance for that comes to mind would be in that revenue loss calculation and that total that we calculate if we wanted to use funds for that reason.
For the
But there's-
nonprofits? Is that what the,
So are you saying separate conversation, we want to provide financial support to Matthews Alive?
yeah, I guess I'm asking a couple things. We didn't have Beach Fest. We didn't have Matthews Alive. We didn't have a lot of these things. Can we fund them in our new budget with ARP money? And secondly, can we enhance the monies that are paid to the nonprofits since there was no Matthews Alive and they didn't get their usual funding? Can we use ARP money to write a check to those nonprofits?
So for first question, I don't see how that would qualify because the ARP funds are focused on revenue loss and say Beach Fest was an expenditure that we just didn't do. So
There was some cost. I mean, we planned for it. We paid some bands. I mean, I'm looking for every, look under every rock.
I understand.
Come on.
It's a loss to the nonprofits.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the separate question. There is the provision in a different portion of the ARP guidance that does allow a locality to provide financial support to the community. And I did see nonprofits listed, so that could be an opportunity to make, say, a direct allocation to a nonprofit, by saying, hey, you were hurt during COVID. We did that through our small business and nonprofit grant program. Nonprofits were eligible the first round of funding, and we did have some nonprofits take advantage of that program.
And I know Renee mentioned earlier on about affordable housing, and I've got a Habitat for Humanity brochure up here on the dais. I believe I learned last year that we had a Habitat house that sold for more than $200,000. So I mean, it's getting outrageously expensive. Could we, possibly direct some of those funds to make Habitat houses truly more affordable? Because I mean, they're not real affordable when they're over 200,000.
Yeah, I think we're open to any of that stuff. I think the key discussion for now or tonight is what can you deploy in this year's budget to offset the tax rate, right? And what we're saying is we cannot give the board a yes. I think it's a no, but we can see what happens. But if final rules aren't going to come out till after the budget's approved, then next fiscal year we will work. And if hiring somebody or a firm can help us, manage this or go together as a group with other cities like the Quad or other towns in Mecklenburg County, we're open to anything And we do want to use as much as we can legally. I think we just got to separate out long-term ARP funding and what to do about this fiscal year's budget that you all have in front of you.
So I just want to be clear, staff really suspects, or your recommendation at this point is that we will get zero funding from ARP, because that's what you're asking us as elected leaders to go to the public and say, we're going to get 9.3 million, but we can't spend any of it. So we're going to have to raise taxes. I mean, it's a hard lift. You're saying we're not going to get any of that money, none of it, to offset some of these budget concerns. I don't believe that. I think we're going to get money this year, and I think we'll probably get more than enough to offset the tax increase that we're talking about.
So I think, where you sit depends on where you stand. So from where I sit, my responsibility is to the organization. And as I hear the needs of the organization and I think about our tax rate and what the community thinks of itself as the kind of quality community we are, 28 cents is not enough. It's simply not enough. And, our ARP funding is great. If ARP funding wasn't around, we'd be talking from a staff perspective of 29 cents. ARP money has reared its head. The problem is there's no clear answers. And between now and the end of the fiscal year or the beginning of the next fiscal year, it's not going to be clarified. Timing's everything, but the timing in this case doesn't work. ARP funding does not help the next year's budget, in my opinion.
I think just to say it a little bit differently, we're absolutely getting the funding. It's the strings that we have to adhere to make sure that we stay legal does not create a clear path to offset the additional increases in revenue that we feel that we need in order to fund specifically the increases to staffing in order to provide the operational levels of service that the community is expecting.
But to be clear, based on the tax increase that you're recommending, that's less than 10% of the ARP funding we're getting. So you don't think we're going to even realize 10% of the 9.3 million this year? I think what you're saying is you don't know, but I have to believe that this organization will realize 10% of the ARP money this year. I mean, that just seems very reasonable. Otherwise, why would they give the money to us?
Well, I think we'll have the funds in hand, but it's going to be figuring out how to fund it. So we're back to this revenue loss calculation that we have to go through that process. And then, let's just say that somehow showed $500,000 in revenue loss. And I'm not even sure that it will when you look at the strength of our sales tax revenue, when you look at the strength of our property tax receipts where people have been making those payments. It's difficult to point to any one line and say there's a clear-cut opportunity right there that's going to show a loss of revenue. The board would then have to turn around and say, okay, we have now established this $500,000. We now want to put it towards this reoccurring operational expense, these salaries for these new hires. And then that money's gone because once it's spent, it's spent. So if you want to spend it on reoccurring, then there's zero opportunity to have the conversation about, do we put it towards paving? Do we put it towards a greenway? Do we put it towards the myriad of other things that we also have needs for? It sounds like from some preliminary conversations with some other board members, there's some interest in utilizing the funds for one-time purchases because then it's very clean and we're not having to come back next year and say, okay, we spent the ARP funds on the reoccurring costs. Now we still have the mouth to feed, but we have no tax rate to support it in FY23.
Yeah, I mean, we can debate this, but I think it's kind of semantics about what bucket you say you're paying this or that from. But I think after struggling through COVID and a lot of people, I think it's a myth that Matthews just went unscathed and people here are great and affluent and everybody's having a great time. I mean, there's a lot of people that I know that live here that are really have been financially hurt by COVID. And I'm wondering, I don't debate that we're gonna have to raise taxes at some point. I'm just wondering if this year is the time to do it, especially in light when we're getting a $9.x million appropriation from the government. Did you have a comment, Ken?
That was basically what I was going to say is, I think sometimes we look at things in a bubble. We're coming directly out of a global pandemic where people have lost jobs, they have lost, family members, they have lost so much. And then we come to them directly after a pandemic and say, we're going to raise your taxes. Oh, but we also have $9.3 million that's supposed to help us with COVID, but we're going to double down and cause a little bit more pain to your paycheck. There's a human side to this. And some people will be able to stomach the, penny and a half, but some won't. And we talk about on this board so often, people can't afford to live here. So, we're furthering that divide right after COVID. Yes, probably in the next couple of years we need to do that, but is it the smart timing to put this on top of people right after a global pandemic? That's especially with $9.3 million is up in the air. I mean, that just, I don't know if I can stomach that. That's my opinion.
Can we get a list of things that have already been funded with like CARES Act funding? I'm thinking about like the school, virtual school at Cruise Road. Was that paid for with CARES Act, or did that, where did that come out of?
So the $184,000 that we received in CARES Act funding was completely covered up with the incentive pay. So when we sent in our justifications to Mecklenburg County for how we utilized the $184,000, we met that total with the incentive pay that we paid to employees that ended June 30th of 2020. So all of those funds are long gone. We've got somewhere north of $130,000 in reimbursement requests to FEMA, but we don't know if they will be approved, and we don't know what the timing is. But that would be to simply pay us back for things that we've already spent funding on, that we just absorbed in our general budget, and then we're hoping to get paid back for.
So the students at Cruise Road, that came out of the general fund?
So it was originally absorbed out of the general fund, and then we received a couple of grants from Elevation Church and the YMCA to offset the costs of that programming.
Offset completely or partially?
Do you know, Corey? Can we get a real number? Can we get a?
I'll confirm the actual percentage of it that we did recover, but I do believe it was a pretty significant percentage.
And I would like to know what the impact on Parks and Rec was, because if Parks and Rec lost, just almost all of their revenue for the year 2020, is that, I realize it's dedicated to tourism funds, but could it not go back into Park and Rec programming?
Well, the tourism funds could go back into tourism fund related items, which obviously is fine. But for me, at least, this primary discussion is about the general fund and being able to operate the town as it needs to be or should be operated.
I mean, I understand that. And I generally agree that we don't want to use ARP funding for recurring costs. At some point, though, I told you earlier, we're coming out of this pandemic. We have obliterated every single last penny that we had saved a year ago. We have no money in our HSA. We have no money in our savings account. And this 1.5 cent sales tax will take, when I say no money, I say we have $77 left in savings. And you're asking me to spending $45 on that. And sitting on the board, that's a hard decision to make. And so, what's the compromise here where some of these things, we look at some recurring costs? because the intention of the ARP funds is to reduce the burden on the town, right? And so how do we do that? And how do we reduce the burden on the residents of Matthews while improving public safety services? So I hear the board asking for, myself included, for ways not to increase taxes. And I hear staff saying that it's impossible. So I feel like somewhere in there is a compromise. And is that using those tourism funds to do some of the park and rec programming? That doesn't seem like that hard of an ask.
That's not gonna, are you trying to say using tourism funds to help Parks and Rec, which then in turn frees up money in the general fund?
Possibly, yeah. And I know that that's not going to cover $750,000, but I truly believe from the webinars that I've watched through reputable sources that we are going to be able to find that money mostly in non-recurring expenses, but maybe some of it is recurring expenses.
Well, I did not watch what you watched, Renee. Becky, what was the one you watched?
I watched ICMA.
Okay, so that's the International City County Managers Association webinar. That's the problem. We're all learning together, and in the meantime, the budget marches along, or the time frame for the budget approval marches along. The organization needs the tax dollars, the reoccurring dollars, to operate the way you all as a board expect and the citizens expect. And that's why we brought the $0.015 proposed increase to the budget to this board.
Hazen, I have a small question.
Yes, sir.
I started up the computer so I could review the budget documents to answer the questions to the best of my ability. Ad valorem taxes are $14,072,000 and change, way up at the top, I believe. Is that 1.5 only on the 1,973,000? It's an assumption on my part.
Ask the question again. I think
Ad valorem taxes, which is line item 1 on revenue, was I think 14,072,764.
So that 29.5 cents is there and is also in the vehicle taxes. So the vehicle tax rate up there would also include 29.5 cents as well.
So it's ad valorem and vehicle.
That's correct.
And that 14,072,000, is that last year's budget or is that this year's budget? I didn't write that down.
So that's the recommended.
This year.
That's correct.
So that already includes the 1.5. So if I were to look at last year's budget or last year's adjusted budget, it would be roughly 1.5 less on ad valorem and vehicle tax.
Yeah, and you can see that. I don't know which document you're looking at. Document I'm looking at, I can see that. It's because it says 2020 taxes.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out, the 1.5 will raise what dollar value?
About $750,000.
So you're looking for $750,000.
Correct.
And are there 9,000 houses?
There's 9,300 houses, 9,372, and 300 businesses downtown that have those rollout cans as well. So essentially 97 houses get the rollout cans.
9,700?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm just trying to do some math.
I should have said 9,700 structures. 300 of those are business.
Yeah.
9,400 are houses.
Got it.
Okay.
And the ones with container, I don't know what's the dumpster containers and an enclosure, they already are paying.
They go to a private contractor. We're not in that business.
Right.
Okay.
But there's a difference between the people who have dumpsters and dumpster corrals. They are already paying.
That's right.
The rollouts are paying taxes, and we absorb the garbage pickup.
That's
in those
correct.
taxes.
That's correct.
Is that where the $80 came from? Because you run the math, the $80 keeps popping back up.
Yeah.
80 covers the 750.
I'm not sure where 80 comes in, but $20 to $25 a month, from what I can tell, would cover a lot of the debt.
Yeah. So if we were a town that had water and sewer, we'd send out monthly water and sewer bills, and then we'd have a monthly solid waste, or we could have a monthly solid waste fee that could be $20 a month, let's just say. In our case, since we are not in the monthly bill business, and this is what Davidson and Huntersville do, on the county tax bill or on your tax bill, there's a one fee instead of divided by 12. It's just your annual
Solid
fee,
waste
right? And it's
recycling.
$80 or something like that. Yeah.
Jen?
I think that doesn't solve this year's budget crisis though with the tax rate. You're still giving them a tax rate, just pulling the wool over their eyes in a way like, oh, we're not raising your taxes. We're just charging you a fee. They're still paying the money either way. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best course of action to find the $750,000.
So I guess the question would be the balancing of quality of life and the support of the infrastructure and the employees. Where do you get it from? I mean, I've been at this now 10 years. You've been at 12 plus. We've had a lot of years of flat tax rate, 4 periods in 12 years where we had it 2 years or more flat. I'm willing to look at a solid waste rate, and the $80 covers the $750,000. I'm just one of those more practical ones, like where you're trying to do reoccurring expenses with a solid waste fee. It does sound like a little smoke and mirrors moving things around, but I've learned that in government, you guys are dealing with like the pot, and then you dole out from there. We keep pushing it off and pushing it off, and we have these exact same conversations over and over again. I realize we went through a pandemic, but we also have to lead through that pandemic from that aspect of it. And so if someone if it means the bare minimum of $80 on a solid waste covers it, and it's explained how that works out, that's an option. What I don't want to get into is thinking that this ARP money will come along and create the reoccurring expenses, because Becky's spot on. 3 years from now, we're looking for that money. So my thought process is, and it really is thanks to Commissioner Miller, is if you look longer term, you're looking at this fiscal year in some type of compromise, solid waste fee, a tax increase. A fee is a tax. I will grant you that. There's no doubt about that. But that allows you to get in, settle those reoccurring costs, those desperate needs for the 4 officers, the deputy chief. And my God, Chief Kimbrough could retire tomorrow. And then where would we be from that aspect of it? And then that allows us to move a couple years down the pike, status quo, and then the revow comes. And that's where you can begin to prepare the public, starting today, that the revow is a way to continue to keep the quality of life and the level of expectations here high from that aspect. Hopefully we'll continue to grow, because I think the sales taxes and things of that nature is because of the growth that we've had in this community. And, if we don't shut down growth in the town, we should be okay from that standpoint. So I think with the revow down the road a little bit, the hiccup right now, I think it's a way of weathering this and keeping on board. I mean, because Clark is talking about 2018 manpower levels, and we're down 4 years beyond that. I can remember when Chief Kimbrough, and he didn't wave to me. He's driving the truck. I'm not so sure that's the best thing in the world to do, is have him driving the truck. So I guess the question would be I think we're relying too heavily on the federal government. I think the federal government money was to bail out states and people that weren't properly handling their finances well. The town of Matthews has done a pretty doggone good job of handling its finances. And I was telling Ken before the meeting, I have spent every year for 10 years going through that big thick folder that Lori gave me. And it was tiresome because I would tab 30 or 40 pages. I'd sit down with those two. And by the time an hour would go by, they dispelled all my, I found $5, I found $10, and it wasn't there. So I really have a lot of trust in them from that aspect of it. I'm looking to, like Jeff's looking for, is a compromise, but I just don't know how we compromise our way out of not some type of fee or increase someplace.
I'm going to draw up a scenario that has a little bit of logic to it for a future meeting. When Mr. Ryle sent me an email, we debated a few points based on percentage of taxation versus line item, et cetera. And the flat fee for garbage, whether they're at Higdon's house, my house, or anybody else's house in the town of Matthews, they're still tipping 2 containers, a recycle and a garbage. But the $500,000 house is paying a lot more, or rather a lot less in percentage than the $210,000 house. In other words, like I said once before, I live in a modest house, and my Matthews tax is about $460. Well, according to my math, 203 of that goes to solid waste out of 460. So, and the $500,000 house is also, well, I'll put it into a logical perspective at another time.
Yeah, I think that number's high, just my first blush, that's going to solid waste. But I'd say we can do the math, or do the math, and your logic is.
It's $1,973,000 a year for sanitation solid waste, and divide that by 900 or 9,700, and it's $203 a year.
You're saying you're right.
You know, I might be pulling it wrong, but we'll figure it out. And like I said, I own a couple homes in unincorporated Mecklenburg County. I pay $25 a month, which is $300 a year. So somewhere between $200 and $300 a year is what it costs us to dump our garbage out weekly. It's a substantial portion of our budget.
If I could just comment on some of the comments that have been made. I mean, I agree with Commissioner McCool. I mean, a solid waste fee is a tax. I mean, it's the same thing. You're still paying more out of your pocket. It was my hope coming into this meeting that we could, I've said repeatedly, I understand that at some point we're going to have to raise taxes, but we should do it very carefully and as infrequently and as low as we can always. And my hope was that we could make it to the reval year without raising taxes, considering that we had $9.3 million coming in. And, you know, I just keep hearing from staff that, hey, we're not going to be able to hardly get any of that money. And I don't think Matthews should be punished and not take advantage of those funds because we're financially responsible. I mean, I want to make sure we, again, use every cent of that, and I don't want to send any of it back. So, again, I just think it's a real bad look, and it's a real hard lift for me personally to go to my friends and neighbors and constituents and say, we've got $9.3 million coming in, and we're going to raise your taxes. That's a hard thing to do. And so unless we can absolutely show them without any hesitation that we're not going to be able to get any of that money this year, we're not going to be able to get any of it, and we have to raise taxes because, you know, to Mayor Pro Tem Garner's point, if we had to use some of that money for recurring fees, so what? I mean, is that the end of the world? And we do it for a year or two. When the reval year comes up, we can settle everything up. So. Again, it's just it's very difficult for me to explain to folks why that is. Maybe you can help us understand why we got $9.3 million and we can't use any of it, because that doesn't seem reasonable, and it's not going to seem reasonable to a lot of people that live here.
But will the future board at reval time not cave and say, no, we're not going to go there? So I guess And it's true, but I mean, I'll go back to what we talked about. I mean, if you wanted to do, Jeff's saying like $200 for solid waste, and I'm saying the numbers say $80, cut you at the line. And it said households and individuals. In my mind, it's a rebate. In my mind is you have a solid waste fee of $80 and the next reval is 3 years down the road. So each adult and household in the town using the ARP funding, let's say half of it, gets 200 and some odd bucks, $240 actually, 3 years of $80 in rebate for the solid waste fees. But again, it's using the ARP funding that you so desperately want it. And so at this point, that's the only thing I hear that's a potential is we're rebating you back your money. We're giving you back your money, but in lieu of the fact that we have a solid waste fee in here to begin offsetting. I mean, it's a wash. I mean, it's revenue neutral, for lack of a better word, thanks to the federal government. And that's all precipitated on the fact that at 150 some odd pages, that could be done.
Well, we're talking about a penny and a half, which is, from what my understanding, $45 on a $300,000 house. If my choice is $45 or $80, I would take the $45. I don't want either one of them, but.
Right. And that's why I'm just wondering where the negotiation is on this thing. But I think if you could use the ARP funding as a rebate, economic hardship rebate, we've all suffered in some capacity, and you put it to that, it goes back into the hands of the people that have been supporting the state, the local, and the feds.
But people are hurting now.
Okay, well, I mean, if John's math or logic is sound, in theory, you could say $1,000 per household. 10,000 houses, $99.7 million, that's $10,000 a household. I just don't think it's going to be that simple. I mean, to me, this is a classic case. I've been around over 35 years. Everybody gets really excited. It's just like FEMA funding for hurricanes, by the way. Everybody, we're going to go in there. We're going to help you. It takes years to get through the process, because what happens is the federal government doesn't want their money wasted. It's just like the bridge to nowhere in Alaska. That's still a concept, at least in my mind, because that's the one, the federal government wants the credit for getting this money out here, but what they don't want is some wacky community to do something wacky on it, and they'll never live it down. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to be tight on the restrictions, and to think they're not going to be tight on the restrictions, you're being naive, because they don't want anybody wasting money. If nothing else, they don't want the bad publicity out of it. So it's going to be hard to spend. I guarantee it's going to be hard to spend, and we're going to have to be accountable for it. And I think what I hear you struggling with, Mayor, is we're not going to have a clear answer for you before July 1st. And I'm, sorry for that. So the question is going to be, are y'all willing to raise taxes without a clear answer or not?
No.
I had somewhat of you could say a smirk on my face when you said the federal government doesn't want you to waste money, and they just went into debt. How many $1 trillion to send this money out?
Oxymoron.
The bureaucrats, let me say it like this. The bureaucrats that are in charge of managing the money, they're, in my experience, whether it's FEMA or something like this, it's going to be a heavy lift.
That's why you can't assume that you're going to get it. We're hypothesizing, and that's why I just look, either you're doing a tax increase or you're looking a little bit at the solid waste, because I think the solid waste is going to be it's going to continue to be an exponential burden on this town, and you're going to have to peel it out someday. It's coming. And so that is only a small portion of what the total peel out is. If Jeff's accurate on his numbers, you're looking upwards of $230, $250 a year.
But to be clear, I'll go back to my previous point. We're telling our citizens that we don't believe we're going to get even 10% of this $9.3 million this year. We're not even going to get 10% of it.
It's not a matter of not getting it. Is it free to use for things that are in the proposed FY22 budget? That's the difference. We can put it to all kinds of stormwater projects, probably spend the entire $9 million on just stormwater projects.
CJ too excited.
We'll have the best stormwater system, this side of the Mississippi. But none of those projects are in the FY22 budget. None of them are proposed as part of it. So it's absolutely not a matter of we're not going to get it or we're not going to be able to spend it. Is it going to be eligible to be spent on things that are sitting in the budget document that's in front of you? And it just feels so cloudy at this point, a few weeks prior to mandated, passage dates, that it's not a limb that I'm comfortable, going out on, because there's so many hurdles to climb. And then the board would also have to then agree that that's what we're using it for.
Jeff?
11 years ago, we were at 33.25. We're at 28 today. If we would have stayed at that, we wouldn't be having this conversation year after year after year after year like a boil under my saddle. If we would have done what Kerry did, we would have consistency. And you wouldn't have this torturous begging for cars and personnel and the needs to run the town properly. It was silly back then to go down, and it was silly again in 2019. We went from 35.5 to 28. So we shot ourselves in the foot by this silly little one industry only, revenue neutral argument. Doesn't happen in any other industry. So I think it's our own manifestation.
And just to clarify, I'm reading through the interim guidance right now. When it does talk about assistance to individuals, you do have to be able to demonstrate an economic harm that that person has suffered under COVID. So it could not be a blanket, everybody gets a check. So I retract that statement. There would have to be some level of establishment of, say, somebody has become unemployed due to COVID, and then they could qualify for some type of a rebate program or some kind of financial support program if the board was interested in developing something like that. So there would have to be some parameters on it. But it does say assistance to individuals, so you can get down to that granular level.
Down. Yeah.
But what I'm finding hard to believe is this right here is like every other town in the United States. This is what it takes to run a town. And we're saying nothing in this document is eligible for this funding. Pardon my French, why the hell did they send it to us then? I mean, why do we get it if we can't use it for not one thing in this document, which is the entire budget of our town?
Because it's perfect optic for the politicians to say, we gave you all this money, and the bureaucrats set up the rules, and then towns like us have no ability to put it into the hopper.
This is not unusual. This is what every town has to spend, right? It's frustrating.
Will it cover divorce attorneys? Because that would be a hardship.
Asking for a friend.
Oh, that's pretty good. Way to end on a humorous note, Commissioner Miller.
One in every crowd.
That's all we got, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Well, thank you.
We did not cover the other part, and I think Jeff asked, what did we do in the previous years? So a comparison on that?
Yeah,
I have it right here.
we pulled it. No, I know exactly. It's under other.
Tax rate history?
No, it's under other. And here you go. That's it. So that's what we did in 21 for these other line items. The one I would point out to y'all is the tourism grants, because tourism dollars went down in our formula. And I think that's the way we designed it. We under the premise it was going to go up every year. So these nonprofits that get tourism funds would get whether divide up, several $1,000s a year. This is an example where they get less. I would suggest we go up there some number, maybe to 83 or 85 or something like that in that one. And also Arts and Science Council, we've been giving them $25,000 for a number of years, which is better than the other towns in Mecklenburg County. But they asked for, Commissioner Pro Tem, I think they asked for $35,000. Is that, or is it $1 per capita?
That's what I heard, $1.
I think they asked for 35. I would like to lobby for 32, so it's closer to $1 per capita.
So I guess what I would say, if nobody has any objection, we could add 32 to Arts and Science Council. Y'all may have an objection.
I don't have none. I don't. I think they should.
Can we use ARP money for that?
No, it's tourism dollars.
No, I don't have a problem with that.
And then
I don't-
the tourism grants, I would suggest going up to 83 because it'd give them more money than the previous year.
And did we get money back from Matthews Alive, or did that just kind of go out and?
You asked one of Ken.
So
Asked about Beach Fest.
So they did not get $60,000 last fiscal year because they did not have we did not have Matthews Alive.
Okay.
So next fiscal year, we will give them $60,000 and they'll have Matthews Alive in 22. So 21, they did not get $60,000. In fiscal year 22, they will get $60,000.
Yeah.
And is that money just sitting there? I mean, how does that work in terms of budgeting?
So that funding will just roll to the tourism fund balance if it's not utilized. But keep in mind, when we set these budget amounts, it was anticipating a certain level of revenue as well. So in your monthly budget reports, we've been talking about a significant shortfall in the tourism revenue, but it has been balanced by decreased tourism expenditures. This is an example of an expenditure that never hit those books. So it's offsetting that loss of revenue.
Okay.
So Commissioner Pro Tem, if that's not clear, if you want to call us tomorrow, we can talk about it some more, or.
I mean, I think that's clear. I guess my question is, does it count as a revenue loss if we're using money to offset it?
So you're back to the ARP, right?
Yeah, I've never done with that, apparently.
Thank you, Renee.
No, it's not a revenue loss to, tourism funds, we can argue are revenue loss. What's going on for these different programs are not a revenue loss. They can't argue revenue loss if they didn't hold the event. But could, somebody else, some other nonprofit could argue revenue loss, and we can get into the nonprofit business if we want to. Like, okay, setting the criteria, making people make a case to us, like here's how my nonprofit was impacted, and we can use some of that $9.7 million for that.
No, I'm not even getting that deep into it. I'm saying if there was a tourism loss, say back to Parks and Rec on the town side, but we're using the money from the general or from the tourism funds to make up for the money that we lost from programming.
So I think if I understand the question correctly, so there is different pots of tourism money. Tourism money, where there's 4 divisions in Parks and Rec, and it's special events, which is all tourism dollars. It's the community center, which is tourism dollars. Then non-tourism dollars are the rec center, Cruise Road, and the parks. So if it's associated with the 2 of those, there's no tourism dollars involved. Can I make a suggestion? We've been going at this 3 hours. Could we have this conversation, Commissioner Pro Tem, tomorrow?
Is it past your bedtime?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I mean, we were just looking at these dollars, so I was trying to understand what is where and all of that. So yeah, we can talk about it tomorrow.
Okay, good conversation. Thank you, everybody.